everyone. Thanks for coming. I know that this is also your class, but and you may or may not know that I'm Rachel Litsky. This is Sam Hunt. You probably know us, but last year we started a series, and this is the second year of it, called Contemporary Writing and Feminism. And the writing department and Writers Forum got in on it, and we are very grateful for them. And I just wanted to say a couple words about that series and how we conceive of it, and how Paula Fox is so perfectly situated here with us and you and this series. So we're just leaving Women's History Month. Just ended, 2 days ago? And we've entered National Poetry Month. And 2 months ago, it was African American History Month. And here at Pratt, we have all these constituencies, very strongly. Until Tracy Morris started doing events, there was never any sort of cohesive way to sort of organize our thinking around these issues. So Sam and I last year thought, let's start a series to think about women in writing, and in terms of what does it mean to be a feminist in these times. And we were very interested this year I was thinking as I was thinking about my comments that I grew up in second wave feminism, and one of the slogans of second wave feminism that I keep on thinking about, which you may or may, the other thing I just want to say is that the other inspiration for our series came from Pratt Feminists, which is a student group which a lot of writers are involved in. So call out for Pratt Feminists, yeah, very inspiring group, and this person can tell you how to find out more about them. We were interested this year in an ongoing and sort of endemic phenomenon of women's writing careers, which sort of becomes very vague and absent in mid-career, and also in honoring the vibrancy and legitimacy of elder writers. And one of the things that Sam was very excited about, which maybe you'll talk more about, is re-inspiring the term old ladies. And of course, this was a sort of very controversial idea, partly because ladies, just like, the idea of I was saying, like, personal is political, and what this brings up is how language is political, right? So language can render somebody invisible or visible, and so the idea, like, when are we ladies, when are we girls, when are we women, all these issues. And if you're gendered differently and you're called lady, is that making you invisible? But it just brings up all these issues about how potent language is and how necessary it is for us to keep on using it to articulate our realities, and for that, Paula Fox obviously is ideal. And here's Sam Fox to talk more.
I just want to add one more thing about can you guys not hear us? One more thing about the reading. Paula Fox is the Michael Mahoney reader. You can hear? Okay, thank you. And it's so exciting. I mean, this is one of the biggest readings of the year for us. And it's so exciting to have you here because you are such a tidal influence on so many of the professors here. And we feel so lucky to honor Michael in this way. Those of you who don't know, Michael was a very spirited young man who died while he was a student in the writing program. And this series, his family and his friends give us money to fund this series, and we're very grateful to them for that. So I think we have some student introducers, right?
Yeah. Just another call out to thank Forum for the space, these 2 weeks for Paula Fox.
Thank you guys.
And next week, Judy Grahn, who's a great inspiration for me and for many of us in this room as a poet and a writer.
Yes, and introducers William Riley and Sarah Appel.
Since publishing her first book in 1967, Paula Fox has written 6 novels, 2 memoirs, and 22 children's books. They are the work of a tireless genius, a writer who paints her rich past on the page in a clear and distinct voice.
Fox's memoirs, borrowed finery in the coldest winter, detail events from her extraordinary life. Born in 1923, the unwanted daughter of absentee parents, Fox spent her childhood in the care of a series of guardians, including 2 years on a Cuban plantation with her maternal grandmother. She worked several different jobs after finishing high school, ranging from machinist to publishing company employee. She read books for a film studio and worked as an English teacher for both Spanish-speaking and emotionally disturbed children. At 22, Fox found work as a stringer for a British news service in newly liberated Europe.
Growing up without a net, Fox was not able to write full-time until the age of 40. Her first novel, Poor George, was critically acclaimed but not commercially successful, creating her reputation as a writer's writer. She won the Newbery Award for The Slave Dancer, a National Book Award for A Place Apart, and in 1978 was presented with the Hans Christian Andersen Award by the Queen of Denmark for her lasting contributions to children's literature. Although today, Paula Fox is mainly known for her monumental novel, Desperate Characters. In this dark comedy, Fox creates cogently identifiable characters and slowly unravels them by deconstructing their material lifestyle within the claustrophobic setting of New York City. The story focuses on Sophie Bentwood, a married inhabitant of Brooklyn during the gentrification of the 60s, who after being bitten by a stray cat she meant to help fears that she has contracted rabies.
Of the bite scene, classmate Emery Harkins writes, Fox is able to depict this moment in Desperate Characters with ease, revealing in Sophie the true human condition, a search for gratification, a sense of curiosity, the inevitability of isolation, and the awareness that death is inescapable. Sophie avoids the reality around her. The festering bite remains untreated because she is afraid of the painful cure. She and her husband Otto allow contempt to smolder between them instead of confronting reality. Sophie chooses inaction and creature comfort, sinking herself into the claustrophobic suffering of dread. By the end, the question of survival matters not, while a larger question reveals itself. What do we survive for?
Student Brandy Sperling writes of Fox, someone who has read her memoirs might feel familiar with her fiction, as she creates a world of archetypes drawn from her experiences, and especially her traumas. By putting her own past under a microscope, her memory comes under inspection. In her 2005 memoir, The Coldest Winter, she says she sees the past differently as she grows older, so in a sense the past changes. Fox uses her work as an outlet, channeling a fluid past. Time exceeds memory, she says. My circumstances seem to have changed overnight, but it must have happened over months, slowly. She explores her experience with movement in space in one of her smaller young adult novels, Monkey Island, in which an 11-year-old boy, Clay, abandoned by his parents, is forced to spend a winter on the streets. Painfully aware of what she is revealing, Fox's acute point of view keeps the reader firmly pinned in the moment. When Clay is living in a park, we know that he is cold, hungry, and tired. But it isn't until his hospitalization that one sees the sores, ill-fitting clothes, and pneumonia that has ravaged his body. Her characters have a keen understanding of their setting, and this awareness draws the reader closer to her characters and the objects around them.
Fox does not shy away from challenging topics such as gentrification and the politics of space, but constructs her stories around them in both subtle and extroverted ways. For example, in Desperate Characters, she continuously juxtaposes the inside and outside world. And in Monkey Island, she writes, even in hell, there must be different neighborhoods. Later, Clay reflects on how he used to view the outside world of streets and sidewalks as something you pass through to get to other inside places. To help us navigate through these spaces that Paula Fox creates, 3 craft faculty members, Gina Zucker, James Hanahan, and Samantha Hunt will read selections of her work. Please welcome to the stage Gina Zucker.
I'm going to be reading from Paula Fox's memoir, Borrowed Finery. I'm just going to read from an early section taking place during her time living with the Reverend Elwood Amos Corning. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
In the back? Yes. Uncle Elwood, who took her in when she was only 5 months old. And they resided in upstate New York in Hudson Valley. And here it is. I couldn't conceive of Uncle Elwood's struggle to make do with the yearly salary he was paid by the church so that it would take care of his mother, himself, and me, along with paying for repairs to the ailing house, any more than I could have conceived of the lives of my parents unfolding somewhere in the world. And I would not have known how poor the Blooming Grove parishioners were, how they could barely afford morning when the weather turned cold, with an oil burner, and that the house required a new roof. It leaked so shockingly, he said, he could fly to Jericho. At his words, "fly to Jericho," my heart jumped into my throat. It was the most extreme thing I ever heard him utter. He was at the end of his rope. It was the absolute limit. His protests never lasted more than a few minutes, but the pictures that formed in my mind, evoked by the distress I heard in his voice, usually so serene, so playful, frightened me. The malevolent furnace, as it labored at night with great clankings, would climb the stairs and kill us with fire, and the holes in the roof would be enlarged so drastically we would be exposed to the merciless night sky and its rain and wind and cold. But more terrible by far was the well in the middle of the meadow. When the water pressure in the house was so low that only a puff of stale air came from the kitchen faucet when it was turned on, and the toilet in the bathroom wouldn't flush, Uncle Elwood set out for the well, carrying a bucket. I watched in dread from the living room window as he lowered the bucket by a rope tied to his hand. He leaned far out over the edge of the well, too far, to keep the rope straight as it dropped an instant later to hit the water with a plonk. He would fall. An enormous jet of well water would lift his drowned body toward the sky, then flood the whole earth. He hauled on the rope, hand over hand, and at last pulled out the bucket, filled. When I ran out of the house and down the 3 broad steps of the porch to meet him, he was surprised at the intensity of my relief, as though he had returned safely from a long, perilous journey. And then he recalled what I had told him of my fear when he went to the well. He spoke reassuringly to me as he did when I was ill. He told me what a fine artesian well it was, how milk snakes kept the water pure. Oh, snakes, worse. With his unengaged arm, he clasped me to his side as we walked across the hummocky ground. I was not able to explain to him the extremity of my terror. I couldn't explain it to myself. This is a new section I'm just reading a tiny bit of. Time was long in those days, without measure. I marched through the mornings as if there were nothing behind me or in front of me, and all I carried likely was the present, a moment without end. Thank you. And now James Hanahan.
I'm going to read a brief but pivotal scene from Poor George, which is about a private school teacher who comes home to discover that he's not alone. And his wife's name is Emma. I think that's all you need to know at this point. As George stepped out into the garage, a breath of wind stirred the tattered newspapers lining the bushel baskets stacked in one corner. It fluttered in the dust-laden spider's webs hanging from the ladder by the window, and brought him the smell of spring. It was slight, a damp wind, a taste of damp earth, but standing alone in the garage, feeling the seasonal quickening in the air, he was assailed by an undefined but powerful sense of possibilities. It seemed a curious thing that, as a man vaguely oppressed as far back as he could remember, he should feel touched, if only lightly, by luck. The back door was open. Emma? There was no answer. She might be sleeping. She might even have taken a walk. He turned off a dripping tap in the kitchen. As he walked into the living room, he thought he heard the radio playing faintly upstairs, and he called Emma again. When there was no response, he opened his briefcase and took from it a worn copy of Moby Dick, along with a handful of blue notebooks in which were written the answers to an examination he had given his 9th grade English class. Most of them would have written 3 pages on the symbolism of the whale's whiteness. Most of them would not have read the book at all. He didn't like it himself. The passion for revenge, he thought, was too alien to him. He placed book and examination papers on the card table he used for a desk. The whale wasn't white at all. It was pale with exhaustion from being hounded by a New England autocrat. As he started up the stairs, the back of his neck prickled delicately. His legs felt thick, heavy. What was wrong with him? He steadied himself against the banister and climbed up to the small upstairs hall. He was about to go into the bathroom when he caught sight of a slight movement of the door to the unused bedroom. His heart began to pound. He felt faint, and when he heard his own breathing, he was struck with terror. He wanted to run, but the danger itself held him fast. "Move," he groaned. Then, with an explosive cry, he flung himself against the door, pushing it until the resistance of the body behind it would let him go no further. He kicked it savagely and heard himself pleading with whatever it was to come out. "For God's sake, come out!" "You're breaking my head," a voice cried. George backed away. Someone snuffled. He waited. Then, shaping and straightening his crushed hat, a boy of 18 or 19 slid sideways from behind the door. They stared at each other. Then the boy pouted and pinched his hat. "Look at that. I just had it 2 days. "Don't move," George said. "Who's moving? You know how much this hat cost me? It's wrecked." "Sit down." The boy sat on the mattress of the spare bed, still turning his hat with short, blunt fingers. "Who are you?" The boy placed his hat on the bed and looked at it. "What's your name?" "Ernest." "Ernest what?" He shrugged. "What if I call the police?" "Go ahead." "Is it worth it to take the chance?" "Worth what?" "The police." Ernest smiled. "You always leave your house unlocked." I could turn you in, George said. The trembling in his legs had stopped. "I didn't take anything." "Did you ever hear of breaking and entering?" "I didn't break in, I just walked in." George struck him on the shoulder. The boy rolled over on his back and drew up his legs. Stricken, George bent over him. Ernest looked up at him without expression, then he lowered his legs slowly. "Get out," George cried. The boy righted himself and stood up. "Out!" "You say it and you say it again. I told you I didn't take anything. I never do. I like to see inside when people are out. That's all." It was only then the thought of Emma, stuffed into a closet, dead, violated, moved dreadfully into his imagination like the fronds of a submerged plant. He ran to the door. Ernest was behind him. "She went out," he said. "Out to the orchard. Then I came in." George pointed at the stairs. Ernest started down. "I've been in all the houses near the reservoir," Ernest said quickly. "Like your neighbors right there? She's a lush. She drinks and he plays. That's the one thing I ever took. A note some girl wrote him. You want to know what it said? I know it by heart." He stopped and turned. "I'll say it to you," he offered. "That's rotten. You know the Devlins? They've got gin in stone bottles, 1,000 records. They owe money, more than you got." George raised his hand. The boy ducked. "I don't want to hear any more." At the bottom of the stairs now, Ernest swiveled around the banister. He looked reflectively at the chipped wood. "Did you turn the radio on?" "Yes," Ernest said, and he laughed softly. "Sit down," George said sternly. Ernest fell indolently into a chair. "Why aren't you in school? At this time of day? You don't know what you're doing, do you?" "Do I what?" Ernest took a cigarette from a crushed pack on the table next to the chair. He saw George look at it. He held it stiffly for a minute, then George waved his hand. Ernest took a straight match from his pocket and lit it with his thumbnail. "Where do you go to school?" "I was held back in the last year, so I don't go." "What are you, 19? "Almost 18. "What about the draft?" The boy looked mildly interested. "Yeah?" "The army." "Which army?" he asked. He stood up. "You going to do anything?" He put on his hat. "Because I'm leaving." "Do you live with your parents?" "One puking drunk. You can tell him all about me. He won't do anything much." "Wait, I'm too old to go to school. What are you looking at my hat for? Listen, I want to go now." But George didn't want to let him go. He stood in front of Ernest, blocking his way to the kitchen. He was experiencing something extraordinary. He felt a nervous exuberance which made it painful for him to stand still. "I'm a teacher," he said. Ernest looked at him impassively. "You'll get caught," George shouted. "You caught me." The power of his impulse impelled George forward. The boy drew back. "You must get through school," George said. He heard the intensity in his own voice. Afraid he would alarm the boy, he tried to speak without emphasis. "There's no place to go anymore if you don't finish up. It's not the way it used to be. I can help you. I can show you shortcuts." "Was that it that got you down? Listen, Ernest. Education's the pass, the key." Listening, but not to George, Ernest shook his head almost imperceptibly. His eyes were vague, but his narrow body expressed a kind of nervous readiness. His dark hair and eyes, the faint amber cast of his skin, gave him an impermeable look. He was, George thought, almost beautiful. His features were purely linear, like those of wooden saints in cathedral niches. His narrow-lipped mouth was finely delineated, his cheeks long and flat. But when he turned, how different he was. Then his mouth was thin as thread, his lynx-like lid suggested secretiveness. He seemed bloodless. Ernest walked past George to the kitchen entrance and instantly retreated, cupping his hand around his cigarette, which he thrust behind him. Emma had come in.
Thanks. I'm going to read a brief passage right from the start of Desperate Characters. And I just taught this book this morning, Paula, and so it's much in my thoughts, and I was interested to hear Emery's comment that he called it monumental, because it's not in size, but it is in your precision and your power of dilution here. It's amazing that this thin volume can be so powerful. So this is right from the beginning, almost. Otto and Sophie have sat down to a dinner of risotto and chicken livers. Otto unfolded a large linen napkin with deliberation. "The cat is back," said Sophie. "Are you surprised?" Otto asked. "What did you expect?" Sophie looked beyond Otto's shoulder at the glass door that opened onto a small wooden stoop, suspended above the backyard like a crow's nest. The cat was rubbing its scruffy, half-starved body against the base of the door with soft insistence. Its gray fur, the gray of tree fungus, was faintly striped. Its head was massive, a pumpkin, jowled and unprincipled and grotesque. "Stop watching it," Otto said. "You shouldn't have fed it in the first place." "I suppose. We'll have to call the ASPCA. Poor thing. It does very well for itself. All those cats do well. Perhaps their survival depends on people like me." "These livers are good," he said. "I don't see how it matters whether they survive or not." The cat flung itself against the door. "Ignore it," Otto said. "Do you want all the wild cats in Brooklyn holding a food vigil on our porch? Think what they do to the garden. I saw one catch a bird the other day. They're not pussycats, you know. They're thugs." "Look how late the light stays now." "The days are getting longer. I hope the locals don't start up with their goddamn bongos. Perhaps it will rain the way it did last spring." "Will you want coffee?" "Tea. The rain locks them in." "The rain is not on your side, Otto." He smiled. "Yes, it is." She did not smile at him. When she went into the kitchen, Otto quickly turned toward the door. The cat, at that instant, rammed its head against the glass. "Ah, the bastard," Otto muttered. The cat looked at him. Then its eyes flicked away. The house felt powerfully solid to him. The sense of all that solidity was like a hand placed firmly in the small of his back. Across the yard, past the cat's agitated movements, he saw the rear window of the houses on the slum street. Some windows had rags tacked across them, others sheets of transparent plastic. From the sill of one, a blue blanket dangled. There was a long tear in the middle of it,
through which he could see the faded pink brick of the wall. The tattered end of the blanket just touched the top frame of a door which, as Otto was about to turn away, opened. A fat, elderly woman in a bathrobe shouldered her way out into the yard and emptied a large paper sack over the ground. She stared down at the garbage for a moment, then shuffled back inside. Sophie returned with cups and saucers. "I met Bullen on the street," Otto said. "He told me 2 more of those houses have been sold over there." He gestured towards the rear window with his hand. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw the cat leap, as though he had offered it something. What happens to the people in them when the houses are bought? Where do they go? I've always wondered about that. I don't know, too many people everywhere. Who bought the houses? A brave pioneer from Wall Street, and the other, I think, a painter who got evicted from his loft on Lower Broadway. It doesn't take courage, it takes cash. The price is wonderful, Sophie. Look, he's curled up on that little ledge. How can he fit himself into such a small space? They're like snakes. Otto, I'll just give him a little milk. I know I shouldn't have fed him in the first place, but he's here now. We'll be going out to Flinders in June. By the time we come home, he'll have found someone else. Why do you persist? It's self-indulgence. Look, you don't mind at all as long as you don't have to see the cat looking starved. That goddamn woman just dumped her evening load of garbage over there. Why doesn't the cat go there to eat? I don't care why I'm doing it, Sophie said. The point is that I can see it starving. What time are we due at the Holsteins? 9-ish, she said, on her way to the door with a saucer of milk. She reached up and inserted a small key in the lock, which had been placed on a crosspiece above the frame. Then she turned the brass handle. At once, the cat cried out and began to lap up the milk. From other houses came the faint rattle of plates and pots, the mumble of television sets and radios, but the sheer multiplicity of noises made it difficult to identify individual ones. The cat's huge head hung over the little Meissen saucer. Sophie stooped and drew her hand along its back, which quivered beneath her fingers. "Come back in and shut the door," Otto complained. "It's getting cold in here." A dog's anguished yelp broke suddenly through the surface of the evening hum. "My God!" exclaimed Otto. "What are they doing to that animal?" "Catholics believe that animals have no souls," Sophie said. "Those people aren't Catholics. What are you talking about? They all go to that Pentecostal iglesia up the street." The cat had begun to clean its whiskers. Sophie caressed its back again, drawing her fingers along until they met the sharp, furry crook where the tail turned up. The cat's back rose convulsively to press against her hand. She smiled, wondering how often, if ever before, the cat had felt a friendly human touch. And she was still smiling as the cat reared up on its hind legs, even as it struck her with extended claws, smiling right up to the second when it sank its teeth into the back of her left hand and hung from her flesh so that she nearly fell forward, stunned and horrified, yet conscious enough of Otto's presence to smother the cry that arose in her throat as she jerked her hand back from that circle of barbed wire.
At the end of Desperate Characters, Sophie's husband Otto throws an ink bottle against the wall, destroying it, telling the reader that words are not enough. I know that statement to be true as I introduce Paula Fox.
Thank you so much for your readings.
Is the microphone on?
A called By the Sea, and it's 1 page long. The sand castle the 3 children had made was already toppling into the upreaching tide, so that in their efforts to save it, they would hardly have noticed the old man who slid down the dune to the beach if he had not been holding a large hand nestled comfortably on his arm. Just behind him followed an old woman and several young people, each of whom carried an article, a sack of charcoal, grilled towels, a folded canvas chair, and so forth. The old man sat down, put the hand down rather, and at once began to cluck, to scratch and scatter the sand with a busy foolishness that delighted the children, whose castle had been completely washed away. Murmuring among themselves a few yards away, the children were hardly aware of the pleasure they were feeling at the sight of the hen on the beach when, due to the way it stayed close to the old man, he stopped to balance the grill on a semicircle of stones gathered by one of the young men. The apparent attachment between the hen and the old man soothed the children, chilled by having spent so much time squatting in the damp sand, and who had forgotten all their parents in their absorption of building the castle, but were now, though unconsciously, longing to be embraced by them, made their shock all the more rending when the old man seized up the hand and wrung its neck. The children clutched each other's cold flesh, their mouths open in mute cries as they saw the blood seep from beneath the old man's twisting hands that turned the russet feathers red. As he suddenly crouched and began to pluck away the feathers with increasing rapidity, the children, whimpering, saw advancing upon them the man at the back, their father, whose enclosing arms they had been just longing for. And they recalled, as though from a long time ago, I can't see this, they're wanting something to carry them into the deep water beyond the waves. And always at the end of their mornings by the sea, but as he drew nearer, he seemed to them a ravening beast. The light was very hard on me because I have
process.
Of course,
we have to
the
do.
question is, you have to think
Yeah,
about them.
yeah.
I wonder if it would be all right.
I think there's a question.
Yes, I can.
Can you
I
stand
see that
up
well.
when you ask and speak
Oh,
loudly?
yes.
Actually, my question is just, what book did you just read it from?
What book did you?
What book did you just read from?
Oh, this is called News from the World. It's a collection of stories and essays.
I thought that was
There are
really
lots of
beautiful. I love reading.
longer stories than that. It's only a page.
I thought that one was the most beautiful out of all the readings that were done, and so I just wanted to love it.
Sorry.
She thought it was the most beautiful of all the readings that
Oh,
were
yeah.
done today.
That's lovely. Lovely to hear. Thank you so much. Oh, there's one over here. I think I saw Hannah. Did I?
I have a question. If
Oh,
you
yes.
guys want some time, I'll take it with my question. One of the nice things of this reading was for us to hear both your dialogue and then your sentences in this story that you read, which had such long, luxurious sentences. And I'm wondering if you want to talk about the difference between writing dialogue and writing sentences.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the last.
I'm thinking about the difference of the experience of writing a dialogue
Yes.
or writing sentences. You have these long, luxurious, beautiful sentences.
Yes.
And I'm wondering if you have thoughts about dialogue between characters or long sentences.
Well, I think I've got quite a few pages of dialogue, but the sentence, I love thinking about the sentences. And then the dialogue is, I hear it as an exchange, but most of it's hard labor. You know, writing is really hard labor. But there are those moments that are filled with pleasure for all of us who write. And they aren't very long. They're pretty because most of it's really fierce work. And you have to push huge glaciers around language, you know, and it begins to melt as you're pushing to carry it further.
That's a metaphor for our times.
I think we have another question.
Of course, feel free to walk as, pardon? Feel free to walk as you wish, no matter what.
When you first started writing,
I'm sorry, I can't hear. I'm hearing this very clear.
when you first started writing, what did you feel like you wanted to be writing about, or did you know?
I think Poor George was my first novel, but I had been writing, I had to work when I was very young. I had to get jobs in order to eat. And so I began, I didn't get to the writing till I was in my late 30s. And although I had written some short stories and children's books by then, but I didn't really start the novels till my late 30s, early 40s, because I had to support myself.
What are the writers that you admire the most?
You know, when you ask me that, they all fled. But I love Isaac Babel. He's a Russian, almost a contemporary, 40, 50 years ago. And Bruce, he passed. And they were entirely different because Babel was short and explosive. Bruce was long and
as your past changed, like the actions in your past just seem to change. And I feel like I was thinking about if that, I'm sorry, you made me nervous. If that were me, like, I'm sorry. No, it's okay. No, it's the microphone. If that were me, I feel like that would be a really frightening experience. Like, it seemed like your life was just always changing. I don't know. I was just wondering if you could talk about that. Like,
My life and its changes.
no, like how you view your past. Like you said, as you got older, your past, you felt like things were changing.
Yeah, I started working when I was very young, when I was 16 or 17. My parents were no good, taking care of me. And so I had to support myself. And I was left with a lovely man named Albert Corning, who was a minister. But he didn't try to proselytize and try to convert me into his particular view. And he'd been a newspaper man before he became a minister. And I spent the first 6 years of my life, and then it was chaos. My Spanish grandmother came and got me. I'm half Spanish. And it was awful after that. But she wasn't awful. But my mother was really awful. And my father was very irresponsible. So, you know, they're dead now. So I can keep them. Yeah, I'm that close to her.
Now that you've gotten older, do you feel more grateful for like the hardships that you've had to go through? Because there are people out there who haven't dealt with
Well, I've
it.
had a life of a certain kind, you know, and I don't know of gratitude, but I've been very fortunate in being alive briefly, you know, since we all lived brief lives, and being conscious, even of painful things, difficult things, not anguish, because one is never grateful for that, you know, none of us, but for pain and pleasure and observation and all kinds of things. You know, just being, the way you are now, and the way I am, and you. We're all here together.
Thank you.
Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
I was wondering, was it difficult for you to write a memoir? Was it harder to write a memoir or to write fictional things for you?
That's an interesting question. It's a different kind of difficulty. The difficulty, because it's always hard to do anything. To bake a pie and to eat it. And I'm a pie baker, book certified pies. And it's always hard to write, but it's also hard to live. Except, you know, when one is having pleasure or lying in a hammock and it's summertime. It's not your hammock necessarily. It's somebody's hammock. But there are lots of pleasures in life, and there's lots of pain. And some people don't have a chance at either one, and they're kind of neutralized. And then some people die young and are taken away from it. But I think being alive is partly accidental and partly planned in a certain way. I don't know by what or who, but we're all here together, correct? And I like being here. And anyhow. Thank you. Yes.
What's the chat?
So, it was my,
Thank you so much.
So it was like talking about how you really didn't start
Oh,
like
she has a microphone.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
Okay. So it was kind of talked about how you didn't start really like writing and publishing until you were older. And like there's kind of this notion, at least I've found, like where people are always like, you need to do things when you're young, you need to get things done, time is running out. So it's like really kind of inspirational to hear that, like, you know, you lived this life, you worked, and then you really started doing what you love. And what was that like, and were there any complications, and how did that work?
You know, I started, I've been in music school for about 5 months, and then my father stopped paying, and I was on my own, but I never lived with my parents except for a few days. And the person who took care of me when I was small was Reverend Elwood Corning, who was a minister, as I told him. But he didn't proselytize, that is, he didn't try to make me into being the kind of religion that he followed or anything like that. He was very funny and wonderful, and I loved him so. And he lived in a Victorian house on the Hudson, and his church was about 17 miles away. His congregation was very mild compared to some religious groups. But from then on, after that, after my father came and took me, my grandmother did first, and because my parents were in Europe then, it was very hard. It was hard in all kinds of ways. It was irregular. I went to California when I was 16. I spent 3 weeks, 2 weeks actually, in Beverly Hills. And my father was a screenwriter. My mother was Spanish, as I told you. And I had to then go away. She said, either she goes or I go. So I was sent to a woman who ran a camp in Redlands, California, who was lovely. She was overweight and lovely. And I spent a year with her, and then the ministry came back and got me again. But it's been, I've had a very mixed life. But somehow, when I write, I feel healed or annealed. They both rhyme. But it's very healing. And I started out very young. I sold 2 stories to the Negro Digest. They were the first printed stories I had. And I was in my early 30s. One was called or Randall, and I can't remember what the other was called. But that began my sense of what it was like to have someone else read my stories, because I always imagined one person reading them, not 2, but 1. And of course I was that person. I hope somebody else would read it too.
Paula,
Yes.
in
Are there any steps here?
here, no, you're good.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
So in connection to that question,
Yeah.
I'm curious to hear you speak about when your books went out of print,
Yes.
and then Jonathan Franzen
Oh, yes.
found them.
Oh,
What
yes.
was that experience like?
Oh, it was so uplifting when I first saw, because he and I had known each other before. I think he was a student of mine, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And because I taught in all kinds of places that didn't require high school graduation, because I'd never been to high school or college. But I was a kind of an interesting writer. So I got hired, on the basis of IW, interesting writer. But I always wanted to go to school, and actually I did. I went to Columbia for 3 years, but I never graduated. I accumulated 90 credits.
But I mean, no, it's fine.
To
To have your work go out of print it seems unbelievable to me that could happen, and so there's a bitterness.
We're briefly, I was just thinking about those windows. You know, somebody looks through them and then they're gone. That's not right. You know? And what can you do? You can look through the window, you can look back into the room, and it's over. You know? But it's not over necessarily. And but the minister taught me real goodness, to be good. And I don't mean that in a prissy way, or an ordinary way. But he was so good that I learned from his being so good. And he wasn't good oppressing me. You know, I being good oppressing me is horrible. But he was good in a gliding way, listen, graceful. Okay. Yeah.
Why don't you come to, come to.
Yes. I'm a little deaf and nice.
Your stories are so like visceral and real, and you feel like you're just in the room with these characters and you're really experiencing it. Do you find that your writing is more of an act of translation, where you find stories in the world and write them down and bring experiences in the world onto paper? Or do you see your writing more as an act of creation, where you're just laboring to like build these worlds as opposed to bring the world into the page?
I don't think either of them quite suits my feeling of discovery, because I'm discovering things as I work. And it's never dreary for me, but it can be terrible, tormenting, and wonderful, and happy, all those things, but it's never dreary. I hope that answers your question.
Totally does. Never dreary's the...
Oh, good. I think if it begins to get dreary, you've got to stop.
Definitely.
And take up hopscotch. One more question.
So this is a very personal question.
I can't hear you. I have to come over. Thank you very much.
So this is a very personal question for you. But as a writer, where do you get your inspiration, or how do you write? Do you write the ending last, or do you have a beginning or a middle?
Oh no, I don't write the beginning last. I get the last line sometimes in my head.
Okay.
And I love to it. Who do I like? Is that what you asked me?
No, like how do you write? Like what's your inspiration, or what's your starting point? Because I find that very interesting as other writers or people who are readers. Like
Isaac Babel, for example, who was a Russian writer, who lived in the early part of the 20th century. I think, maybe about a part. You know.
I know.
And, but now I can't remember your question.
Say your question again,
If you
maybe
start-
phrase it a little differently.
All right. What begins your process of writing?
How do you start?
How do you start? Like, how do you get words on the page, or into like
A sentence.
really? Like just
It just comes like